95% of artificial intelligence projects are failing to impact profit and loss.
What's the biggest misconception that you typically face when you're talking about AI and business transformation today?
Heavily resourced organizations are not necessarily the best prepared. This is a major change management initiative. You need business process redesign. You need organizational structure redesign.
What is the greatest roadblock that you've seen to AI execution?
I think human resistance and the lack of understanding of how and when to trust artificial intelligence.
Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning into another episode of The Chief AI Officer. Today, I'm excited to bring you Dr. Lisa Palmer, who is the CEO at Dr. Lisa AI. Lisa, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation. Before we get started, can you give our listeners and watchers just a bit of background on who you are and your career journey so far?
Yeah, you know what I say, Ben? I say that I have a career jungle gym path instead of a career ladder. So I see the world through different lenses. The first is that I was an IT practitioner for many years, and I worked all across different areas of IT, everything from app dev to running global infrastructure to being a CIO of a financial services firm. Then next, I got on the other side of the vendor table with negotiations and worked for Microsoft and Teradata and Splunk. And it was so interesting to see what it was like to view the world through the eyes of people that I had been negotiating with for many years prior to that. Probably the biggest lesson I learned in that particular change was that it was a lot harder to negotiate inside of those organizations than it was to work with the customers. The customers were the easy part. The next part of my career, I moved into research and advisory, and I focused on half of North America's executive programs offering for Gartner and helping roughly 900 of their executive clients to drive business strategy leveraging Gartner's research. Then I felt like AI was finally, after 7 decades, about to have its moment in the sun. And I decided to go back and get my doctorate in applied artificial intelligence. And I finished my doctorate about 6 months after ChatGPT hit the market and exploded interest in AI. And I left enterprise and launched my own firm almost 4 years ago now, and have been helping multi-billion-dollar and mid-sized firms leverage artificial intelligence to actually drive true P&L impact and customer stickiness since that time.
I love this because this show has really become a lot about the enterprise buyer sides and the difficulty in deploying AI at scale and kind of the noise in the market when they're navigating vendors in what feels like a very overhyped, frothy marketplace, but where a ton of value is being created. And also, the other side, like the startups that have this unique insight on the market and are building breakthrough technology and trying to deliver that to the enterprise. But there's so much friction in that process, as I'm sure you're very well aware. And you have these amazing perspectives from Gartner, like on the research side, on the enterprise side, from the vendor side. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. But I have to say, you mentioned the doctorate, the good timing with ChatGPT. What kind of inspired you of taking that leap and starting your own business?
I felt like I was too deep in the process, and I wanted to be on the leading edge. And the roles that I had had prior to this had left me largely responding to what was happening in the market and carrying water for messaging that had already been made, things like that. And I really wanted to be on the thought leader edge of that, not on the bleeding edge, because I always want to be driving tangible business value, but I did want to be on the leading edge. And I felt like because I had this very different background, this jungle gym career path that I had taken, it had given me some really diverse perspective on what was happening in the market. And it became really clear to me during my doctoral studies how important that variance in perspective is in making sure that AI drives responsible, healthy, and really truly business impacting results. It's so easy to be biased in the way that we see the world, and that bias can be translated and amplified through AI. So getting people onto your team that have that kind of robust, broad background and viewpoint can be incredibly powerful in helping you to avoid the pitfalls of those kinds of biases.
Yeah, we talk a lot about bias in AI and training data, but we always forget how much baggage humans come from that perspective
Right.
when they're bringing it to their roles. Having worn all these hats, what's kind of, before we get into some more of the specifics around some of the frameworks you've developed over the years, what's the biggest misconception that you typically face when you're talking about AI and business transformation today?
Heavily resourced organizations are not necessarily the best prepared to take advantage of what's happening with artificial intelligence in the market today. In many cases, heavily resourced orgs are actually disadvantaged. They are not nimble, they're not able to respond quickly. And what we're seeing is that a lot of these supersized, heavily resourced orgs are seeking out startups and partnering with startups. Organizations like power companies that haven't historically ever been interested in venture work are now finding themselves with a dozen or more startup partners that they're working with because they recognize this limitation in themselves and are embracing very different models for the way that they are problem solving and working in partnership with orgs that they never would have thought to partner with before. And it's becoming more and more common to see major investments happening from very unusual places in the market. And that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, I guess with your experience, you'll know firsthand that enterprises not typically the ones to innovate or transform the fastest
Right?
compared to their startup counterparts. I feel like what's happening in AI is an exponential version of that to some extent, right? Just the fears around security and bias and verifiability are fears that some startups don't have. And just like the ability, as you said, to be so nimble is really creating even larger disparity in terms of the adoption of it and the transformation at kind of the most fundamental business level. You've talked a lot about business first AI strategy. You already mentioned that tangible business value, that being such a key part of how you're approaching this today with organizations. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What does that mean and how do you make it real for your clients?
The very first thing that you have to do when you think about AI, a lot of people tell me, I need an AI strategy. Well, what you really need is a business strategy that's fueled by artificial intelligence. And when we lead with a tech strategy mentality first, if we lead with an AI strategy first, you often overlook the fact that your actual purpose with this is driving the business metrics that you are held accountable for driving. So we want to make sure that we always put what are your business metrics at the front of this conversation? What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? And then making sure that your tech strategy backs that up. And we've gone through this kind of learning curve in the past. We tend to keep relearning some of these same lessons if you look back in history. But this one is particularly important. You've got to stay grounded in business value first. And that seems so basic, but if we look at, there's a report that's that's captured the imagination right now from MIT that is arguing that 95% of artificial intelligence projects are failing to impact profit and loss. And that's pretty disturbing to any leader that is literally investing tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in pursuit of different AI efforts. So the reason, if you really cut to the chase of what is the core underlying reason for that, in many cases, it is the fact that there was not this laser focus on exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to achieve competitive advantage, for example? And how do you want to go after competitive advantage? Are you trying to improve your cost profile across your organization? You really have to be thoughtful and purposeful about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Or, of course, you're not going to end up where you set out to be. If you just get in your car and point yourself somewhere, you may not end up at New York, which is where you intended to go. You might end up in LA instead. And the exact same thing happens in the AI world.
I find it funny how many people on this show come here and say something similar, like along that thread to you, in terms of this lack of strategy at the highest levels within companies that causes severe misalignment between everyone involved and just like so many issues in deployment. Someone on the show recently even said, the idea of starting to formalize your knowledge in the form of knowledge graphs to feed into LLMs, for example, to really get value from AI, exposes how weak some of the self-knowing in organizations is around who they are and what they're trying to achieve in the world. You have talked a lot about how you move then from that AI strategy, right? Like an understanding of the big picture and where you're going, to action. Like when you are talking about something like the MIT study and the inability of enterprises to deliver value, what causes that inability to do it, right? Is it only the lack of strategy? Is it the inability to actually deploy at scale? Like what are some of the biggest friction points in your mind?
Well, there's human resistance is core, right? Human resistance is core. We tend to forget that this is a major change management initiative. When you introduce any form of automation, certainly heavy automation, which is often the case with AI applications, that is a massive change management effort. You need business process redesign. You need organizational structure redesign. So, for example, a lot of organizations end up in what I call pilot purgatory. They have all of these pilots across their organization, and the pilots are working well, but they want to scale the pilots. And they're like, we never effectively scale pilots. Well, that's largely because you've created a false reality inside of your own organization that's wrapped around that pilot. So, for example, you have a pilot team that is incredibly cross-functional. They're working really tightly together. They have strong communication. And that is all wrapped around the tech solution that they've created. Now you're ready to scale that into your organization, and you have your nice little siloed business organizations outside of that false reality of your pilot. And now you're trying to shoehorn this technology into an environment that does not have that interwoven, highly collaborative team and high communication capabilities in it. So shockingly, that doesn't work, right? So the environment that you crafted to make that pilot wildly successful, guess what? That's got to be replicated in your organization, or you're not going to effectively scale those pilots.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've seen very similar things, across a lot of the people that I've worked with in the past, the larger companies, of that POC purgatory or pilot purgatory, as you mentioned, right? That's not where people want to be, particularly the CIOs that come on this show. What do you recommend that people do practically in order to break out of that? What is a structure or a change management process that you would recommend?
So I have a book coming out this month, actually, called Show AI, Don't Tell It. And that is based off of both my applied AI research, my doctoral research, as well as decades of my own experience in helping to drive change management around tech projects. And essentially, the idea is this: you can't just talk yourself into a change management effort. You've got to show what good looks like. You've got to show what the new business process looks like. You've got to show what the new customer experience is going to look like. And I'll give you an example from my book. instead of talking to a board of directors that we were trying to get to consider a completely new fan experience in a stadium, instead we built a hologram example, a hologram demo powered by a large language model using RAG that allowed them to their fans to directly interact with a hologram to answer questions when they entered the stadium. Everything from questions about their players, their record, to where do they find the restrooms in the stadium, that kind of thing. So when you demonstrate a hologram that your decision makers can actually interact with, that is getting them to really understand the impact of the experience that you're trying to create. That's the ultimate show, not tell. That effort got funded, by the way. So those are the kinds of things that when you can bring it to life, then you're able to help to resist it, to lower human resistance, to get them all on board with the vision, capture hearts along with minds so that you can drive repetitive change management efforts. And then in my book, I actually have something that I refer to as the AI Performance Flywheel. That's a 4-step process that helps you to drive that repeatable, measurable, high impact type of AI adoption.
Great. So yeah, talk to me about the flywheel itself, because I think that idea of show, not tell is very simple, but very powerful in terms of driving, as you said, the motivation at the executive level. Some of the things you talked about earlier hinted at the difficulty of what that means in last mile delivery, or really kind of like pushing that through the org. But what is this flywheel and how is it going to help people that are trying to transform?
So the flywheel is essentially 4 components. The first, it's 4 stages. You've got to start with all of the foundational elements that are going to lead you into success. Things like data. You cannot have a very successful AI project without having data that is in a state that will allow you to be successful with that, right? Then we've got to talk about cultural elements inside of your organization. For example, a red flag that you've got to look for is if you have an organization that is highly siloed and information is hoarded inside of those silos, you are going to struggle to be successful with AI at scale. So there are core components inside of this foundational layer that you got to make sure that you put in place. Then the second phase is that you move into execution. Once you've got that foundation solid, you're going to move into execution. You're going to start with efforts that are going to allow you to be successful. So you want to pick things that are going to be low-hanging fruit that will allow you to be successful so that you can build momentum. And the reason I call it a flywheel is because you're really starting to try to, get that flywheel moving. You're trying to get your organization to understand what success looks like. So as you pick those small initiatives and you getting buy-in using visualization, I have a technique that I teach in the book called visual dartboarding that is all about making sure that you come up with a version of what success looks like, and then you let people mark it up. The more they mark up that version, the more they start to share the mental mind share with you, and you're co-creating a solution. And so as you do that, you're in this execution phase, you get support for your initiatives. That allows you to move to the scale phase. And in the scale phase, you start to do things like redesign your work processes around the solution that you've created. You start to consider redesigning your organizational structure to support what has to happen for that change to manifest at a full scale. And then finally, what happens as you do this, and all along you're iterating and creating iterative use cases that are proving value. And as that happens, you ultimately get to where the AI is helping you to unearth new use cases, things that you couldn't see before you had this. And now you're fully engaged in the innovation phase of AI where you're actually getting new ideas for use cases as a result of what you're learning from changing the technology, changing your business processes, and changing your organizational design. Now you're actually coming up with new ideas you never even dreamed of before you got to that phase. And that becomes a self-fulfilling momentum wheel.
I love that. I think it's a very helpful framework for thinking about the different components and how you can get that momentum started. For a lot of practitioners who have felt the pain of pilot purgatory, who know what it's like to drive this kind of change through an organization, how do they not feel that that's an impossible task? Where do you start with people to get them over the daunting, how do I even begin? And like, this framework sounds great, but I'm scared that we're not going to move fast enough, or I'm scared to bring in all the stakeholders across my company. Yeah. How do you influence those quick wins, or how do you get people moving?
I've had this question asked so many times that we're actually we're going to be launching certifications that teach you exactly how to follow this approach, to follow this AI adoption methodology, so that number one, you can start to get everybody to share the same vernacular. One of the things that is a super block and tackling element that I see people trip over all the time is that everyone uses the words artificial intelligence, but they mean completely different things when they say that. In some environments, that's computer vision, and some environments, that's classic machine learning that's been around and successful for decades. In some environments, that only means generative AI, and generative AI throws up all kinds of risks and concerns in the minds of leaders that see things like hallucinations making the news. And so we don't want a board member that is funding something to equate generative AI and the risks associated with generative AI with very tried and true artificial intelligence like machine learning. But when we don't all share the same vernacular, you can come against some resistance that really isn't necessary, because it's simply a misunderstanding of the terminology in front of you. So we're making sure that we start with those kinds of block and tackling things to arm you with the right information so that you can lead your organization in a repeatable, understandable way that leads to these business outcomes, and frankly allows individuals who are brave enough to lead these efforts inside their organizations to lower their own career risk while they do this. We want to empower people to be really truly successful at the individual level all the way up to the organizational level. And that's why we've developed curriculum to allow organizations to do this, either top down from their board down to their front level employees, or from a grassroots up approach as well. If you're just an individual who is excited about this and you want to be on the leading edge, we'll help you to do that.
That's great. And do you have any examples of factors that have slowed down some of that adoption, or ones that have accelerated it? Do you have any memorable examples from your work so far?
So in one particular example, an organization found themselves facing twice a year. They were a seasonal business, and twice a year they would just get bombarded with email support needs from their customer front lines. It was largely driven by storm cycles. This was an insurance company. And as a result of that, every year they would have disgruntled customers. They were too slow to respond. Their employees were completely overworked. They were exhausted. That meant that their error rates went way up in those periods. And so what we saw them do was really break down the customer experience into what did they want to create? What is the experience they wanted to create for their customers, even during this really high volume period? And then we were able to help them to go backward through that process and understand which elements of that needed to needed to leverage technology, particularly artificial intelligence, and which elements had to have human in the loop to really ensure high quality, responsible responses to their customers. And so we were able to help them break that apart, build the technology, rebuild the business process around what that total experience would look like, upskill their people on this new collaborative human plus AI solution, and help them to reduce their negative customer feedback by 26% as a result of that project. So that's the kind of capability that's what's possible. That's the art of the possible, but it is really something that you have to take a holistic look at. What are you trying to achieve? And then what are all of those components, both from a human and technology perspective, that you've got to get lined up in order to drive those kinds of business results?
And how do you go from, let's say you've brought the stakeholders together, you've identified kind of the business strategy, the core KPIs that you're trying to lift. You have people bought in, right? You, like you said, you've just given a great example of, a successful use case. How do you identify the right use cases within an organization? And how do you validate that they're actually going to be shifting the metrics in the way that you want?
This is why pilots are important. As long as you're building a pilot with a clear understanding that you will need to scale your way past that pilot. So if you're from an organizational leadership perspective, I challenge leaders to be courageous. And the framework that I created is called Bold AI Leadership. The book that I wrote is revolves around this concept of being bold AI leaders. And the reason that you have to be bold is because this isn't a simple technology lift. This is redesign of the way that work gets done. It does require courage in leadership to drive the benefits that you want to gain from these efforts. So it's really important that leaders, pull up their boots, as they say in my part of the world, and make sure that you understand that you're going to have to put some skin in the game. You're going to have to put your own reputation on the line to drive this level of change across your organization. So you want to make sure that you go into it with a clear understanding of that, and with a clear plan of how you make sure you emerge on the other end with your career in an even better place than where you started, because you did demonstrate that level of courageous leadership. And we don't leave you out there alone to do that. That's why I felt so strongly about writing a book, creating mechanisms to give people the tools to be successful in this, because I don't want leaders to feel alone in it, because it does require courageous investment.
I think courageous investment is a great term for what it takes, to the beginning of our conversation around how fast startups move in this space, right? It's much easier to be courageous as a startup leader that doesn't have billions of revenue on the line, that isn't managing thousands of employees. But it's hard when you're managing this at scale. So having these frameworks, I think, does help as you try to think about what the next 3 to 5 years looks like for your company. Do you think that the way that enterprises buy AI from vendors, build in-house, how is it going to evolve over the next 5 years?
This is such an interesting space. I actually think that the graphic user interface is going to shift over the coming years. And this is wildly unpopular with big tech leaders, by the way. So what I see happening is an entire new layer of agents and agentification being built that sits on top of classic SaaS platforms. We do see many of the SaaS platforms evolving in this space. But what is happening inside of individual organizations is they're essentially building another layer above these SaaS solutions that is specific to their environment and specific to these particular business objectives that individual organizations are trying to drive. And there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes in what organizations are choosing to invest in from an agentic layer perspective. I think that it's actually building an entire new group of job classifications. For example, anyway, this I see from a vendor perspective, there's going to have to be a lot more cooperative work done. That's something that a lot of the classic SaaS providers have really resisted in the past. And those individual organizations, tech organizations who are being more open to things like API access and interoperability are being more successful in continuing to evolve and gain maintain even access to their current clients. So I do expect some changes to happen in this space. I actually think that the agents are going to become a primary GUI for organizations where the SaaS companies have really held that capability for the last couple of decades. I don't think that's going to continue to be the case in many supersized organizations.
I agree. I think the potential for systems of actions or agentic layers, as you're talking about, that are kind of operating in between the systems of record, like using the systems of engagement, there's so much there. I can see a world very easily where there are, multi-billion-dollar companies that don't have a GUI at all and are just providing like capabilities within that layer. And it's going to be very interesting to see what a world of different agents from different companies interacting with each other looks like, right? I think we've seen model context protocol come out from Anthropic and, other providers having their own versions of this, of like giving API access to models. But when you take that even further, there are so many ramifications for how this whole ecosystem has developed that it's going to be a very interesting 5 years ahead. Do you have any, what is in that world? What excites you the most about the potential of AI, and what is potentially the most concerning to you?
I think that quite literally anything is possible in our environment right now. And I'll give you an example. I know 2 CIOs of what I'll call mid-size organizations. So these are between 500 million and $1 billion organizations. And they have set out to remove significantly sized SaaS players from their entire stack in their organizations. And both of these gentlemen started that effort with vibe coding and supplemented it with really high-end developers and engineers just to test kind of the art of the possible. Could they actually displace some of these big SaaS players from their environments? One of them has successfully displaced a supersized SaaS provider and is moving on to the second one. There's the second gentleman. He isn't quite as far along yet. They're still in a pilot phase to do that. But talk about courage, leadership, and courage. If you're a CIO that's willing to step up and say, we're going to remove our primary ERP and provider from our environment, that is some courageous leadership. Now, whether or not you want to do that in your world, that's entirely up to you. But that anchors in my mind when I think of what is possible. Literally anything is possible. I also see on the opposite end, I see some of these big tech companies doing really creative work and starting to open themselves up to more external collaboration than they've ever allowed before because they see the market evolving. So I also think that there's some real opportunity there for the incumbents to grab more market share as a result of the fact that they are resource rich and they can dump a bunch of money in. And frankly, they've got dozens of partnerships with startups that are bringing in really fast movement for them. And so I see a lot of movement and potential on the opposite end of that scale too. So I genuinely believe that anything is possible here. And so what that means to individual AI leaders, and business leaders with a focus on leveraging artificial intelligence, is that you can bring your vision to life. Your vision actually may be the differentiator for your business. You may be the one that brings your organization into the next generation at a completely new competitive level. You may be opening new lines of business that were previously not possible. So I think it's just an incredibly exciting time to be a leader in this space. If you have a vision, you have the potential to leverage all of these intelligent humans around you and this amazing tech and bring your vision to life.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for sure. I hope that those listening will take that as a call to action to some extent to be able to bring that change into their organizations, no matter how hard it feels at the outset of that process. What's one of your favorite resources for staying up to date on enterprise AI trends, particularly?
My go-to resource is my LinkedIn feed. I follow a really broad range of what I think of as thought leaders in the space, and everybody from venture capitalists to startup leaders to enterprises that I feel like are really being leading edge to tech company and and everything from strategists to deep technologists. So that's where I like to go, and because my feed is full of insights from the field, first person is super important to me.
Yeah, it's funny. As someone who also has a heavily curated LinkedIn feed, very focused on AI and the startups and enterprise, it's both an incredible resource, and then sometimes I forget how much of a bubble it can be when I go out and talk to people not in that space, when I think that everyone is like on the front lines deploying agentic AI, and then I realize half of the world has no idea what we're talking about.
At least half. At least half. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for you, in your experience, what is the greatest roadblock that you've seen to AI execution?
I think human resistance and the lack of understanding of how and when to trust artificial intelligence is such a roadblock in today's environment. So let's think about all of these different ways that we run into this. We have skepticism from board members about AI's alignment with their long-term strategy. We've got doubts from CFOs about its ability to drive financial return. We have worries from risk and compliance teams about regulatory exposure. We've got IT leaders that see the integration as a complete nightmare. We've got we have business units managers that fear eroded trust based off of AI driven decisions that they're not sure they have confidence in. Then we've got frontlines employees who are worried about job displacement, and teams that just generally feel like AI is disrupting their way of working and the things that they know have worked for decades. So as when we take the totality of all this into consideration, it's no wonder that there is so much resistance to the change that artificial intelligence is introducing.
I agree. I think that's one of the things that has come up so much from CIOs on this show is the level of human resistance that can come up, and the very different ways in which that manifests again across all of the stakeholders involved. And so I really like that quick overview of all of the ways in which that occurs, and hopefully how we can overcome it.
And that's why show not tell is so important. Every one of those audiences have to see the benefits.
Everyone, that was Dr. Lisa Palmer. Lisa, thank you so much for joining on the show. It's really been a pleasure. If people want to follow your work and learn more about what you're doing, where should they go?
I'm on LinkedIn every day. I write extensively on there. It's Palmer Lisa C. And I also write extensively. I have a blog. I share as much practical advice as possible targeted at business leaders. I try to speak very plainly and not in a lot of technical jargon so that it's accessible and usable. It's drlisa.ai/blog, and I just encourage you to follow me there as well.
Well, I encourage everyone to go do that, or send Dr. Lisa Palmer a DM if you listen to the episode on LinkedIn. And Lisa, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Ben.